Hello everybody, I am nerdSlayer and this is the first episode of MMO Lab. MMO Lab is a new series where we cover both old and new MMOs. For the classic MMOs, I will show people why these games were particularly unique for their time and how they hold up to today's day and age. For newer MMOs, this show will serve much like a typical first impressions / review of sorts. Bear with me, this is a work in progress show, and it won't be as refined and edited as my Death of a Game series. So the content in this video is inherently going to be less edited. It's going to be a bit more freeform, and some of my commentary is going to be very much shooting from the hip, so just expect that when you go into this. I think, however, it does give me a great chance in highlighting more game-specific details that I can't necessarily cover in my Death of a Game videos. Plus, if you guys enjoy watching me play and talk about MMOs, you will love this. All of this will be filmed live on my stream at twitch.tv/nerdslayer with 3 R's. Today's episode is on Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XI was the first Final Fantasy MMO and continues to exist in an official capacity till this day 16 years later. I never got the chance to play the game back then, so this is my first time ever playing the game. Let's waste no more time and get into this episode. Alright, let's waste no time, let's get into playing Final Fantasy XI. Now, I need to preface this with setting up this game took at least an hour. It was a bit of a hassle. I had to download an old launcher called Play Online, which is outdated by all measures. Had to create an account, a Play Online account, link it to my Square Enix account, and then add a character to make the game playable. For the longest time, the game kept saying that it didn't have my license or my product registration key, when in reality I didn't add myself a character slot and start my trial. That already has some level of effect in regarding the playability of this game in the current day and age. Not a lot of kids in 2018 are going to be willing to spend 30 minutes to an hour trying to figure out how to run a game in windowed mode, how to run it in a higher HD resolution, and then also how to play the game, period. But we figured all of that out, so let's get to actually playing the game. This is an interesting little... Oh, I like how they changed the music. She looks like she's about to do a fashion show. This is my jam, dude. Final Fantasy music is like some of the best music. I'm deciding between the male and the female elf. I think the male elf looks pretty enough. This guy looks like a super villain. He looks arrogant. Wait, why is this one running? Everyone wants me to play a Galka. Yeah, I don't really have a desire in playing some big lumbering dude. It's not my style. That guy looks too pretty. This guy looks 100 years old. I'm not really digging these faces. Let's go back. Look at the female faces. I have a thing for elves, guys, as you guys have realized. I also just dig this music. I like how they make the female characters have some sort of like porno music. Yeah. Let's do it. Our initial job. It's not a big deal which one you choose. Okay, I'll pick, let's do magic. I like black mages. So we'll do that. And we'll name ourselves Devanori. There you go. We have a little bit of lore here, asking what country I want to start in. The Kingdom of Sandoria, the Elven, a proud race of warriors, forged this kingdom in northern Quan from the fires of civil war. Looks like the capital. Oh crap, no, I just wanted to look at it. Bastok, established in southern Quan by the Humes, a people with great technological ingenuity. So this is like the human city, then? Okay, let's just start in our given city. First off, the soundtrack is amazing. There's tons of good music, and soundtracks are always really good when it comes to setting immersion in the game. If you don't have good music, then it's kind of hard to really hook somebody initially into like the world or the mythos that you're trying to hook them into or establish. I love how the run animations look like they're running in slow motion, and the walk animations make people look like abnormally like buff. To me, there's just something about old school MMOs in regards to how they bring you into the world. it's like, yeah, sometimes they'll have a little bit of story in the opening crawl, but then they're kind of just like, all right, here's the general idea of where you're supposed to go. Go find your way. There's something almost like intimidating, but also just exciting about that, because it's like you have to figure out you have to then figure out, you know, where you're trying to go. One of my biggest issues so far with the game is how whenever they talk to you in a way in which you have to slowly crawl through the dialogue. Even if you read, like, let's say for example fast, because there's no voice acting. So if you read really fast, you're still kind of forced to slow down and wait for the animations and the text to catch up. Try to form a party with at least 2 members, all with allegiance to the same country. Think you can do it? Sure. I ain't scared. But that's a good thing. They tell you how to, or tell you you should worry about grouping. Because I hear that that's the most important thing in this game. Hooray! Just look at how cool this scene looks to me. Like, to me, this scene looks awesome because it's like they just explained to me how to group, and then I get to run down this little corridor where clearly a good amount of detail has been spent in creating these textures and look and feel and such. Final Fantasy XI is certainly slower than most games, especially in this current day and age. But I don't think that's going to bother the people who still play the game, because they played the game probably back then or joined with the full, expectation for the game to be slower. When a game is slower, I think it really only affects the people who, A, are not used to such a game, B, would be that they haven't played a type of game like that before. Because it's one thing to, like, not be used to, like, I'm not used to this game, I never played it before, but it's another thing to, like, if I've never played a slow game, I've played slow games before, so I'm not entirely, like, fish out of water in regards to that. How old is this game? At this point, the game is 16 years old. It's pretty insane. This is where, as a game ages, it almost seems, like, depressing in a way when you play. Because it's like you walk around in these nearly abandoned zones and you just think to yourself, man, could you imagine when this game first came out? There was probably somebody just like me running around just looking at things. Nowadays, in the current gaming age, most things are instants and most things are theme parks. If somebody had to run around like this and not really know where to go, they would be enraged, or they would be very frustrated because they would expect a more intuitive, slash guided experience. But I don't mind games that are not particularly obvious on what you're supposed to do, simply because, I mean, they're a dying breed, first off, but second off, I think that it's a nice change from things. The issue with creating large towns and large areas and large worlds, really, is that if you don't create a reason for people to be in certain areas, they're not going to go to those areas. Like this area, for example, I'm going to assume that this is sort of like a noob area, hence why there's next to nobody here. But when I was in the town square earlier, that had some type of merchant there, good amount of people were there, because that's a bit, that's more of like a centralized location. So that's where I feel like some game companies, while I understand why they put in a certain amount of, care and detail into making something, as detailed as this area is, for example, it almost ends up being kind of useless in the end, right? One of the coolest things about being in an old school game is that even just walking outside had a certain level of danger to it. That's where current MMOs, I feel like, are just super lacking. It's like, first off, a lot of the current MMOs don't really even have PvP in any type of world format, right? So you don't have a fear of another player. The mobs are so unbelievably easy that you're not worried about dying to a mob. And even if you did die, you don't really lose much. You just gotta run back to a certain zone. In games like Final Fantasy, you could lose XP. In games like, Ultima Online, you could lose your potential gear. The consequences back then for dying was far, far worse than the current age of MMOs, if you will. But there's a bunch of crowdfunded MMOs that are coming out that seem to be trying to introduce some of that old stuff into the game. The heals and targeting menus are like all the way in the bottom right. So it's kind of hard to see what we're doing here. Oh crap. Oh dude, he's already whooping me. Ah! Oh, we leveled up, baby. Easy. Well, the thing is, Scorn of Rex, I agree that the pretentious veteran can be very harmful to growing a game, but you have to understand that not every veteran wants their game to grow. And that's a strange concept to understand. But Final Fantasy XI guy veteran, Joe or whatever, you know, let's insert random name, could not really care about the game getting new population, right? Because he wants it to have the same level of audience that it already has. He likes that it's a niche game. He likes that it's super unique because it makes him feel more important that way, right? It makes him feel better. It makes him feel like, you know, he's superior in some type of way. Some veteran players don't care about the health of their game necessarily. This was demonstrated whenever I've done videos on, say for example, my Death of a Game video on Age of Conan. A couple people said something along the lines of like, ignore this guy, ignore the video, like he's an idiot, and basically we went into these ad homs when it's like the actual developer of the game said that the game was going into what's called maintenance mode. If you're familiar with what maintenance mode is, it means that they will no longer be updating the game. So does the veteran player care that they brought it to maintenance mode as much as he cares that somebody says that the game is dying, right? He cares more that the person says the game is dying because to him, that means that he would lose the power, the time, the effort that he spent into the game, right? More so than he cares about it getting new players. So basically, long story short, people care more about loss than they do about gain, right? It's not the players, at least I would say from a selfish standpoint, it's not a player's decision or their prerogative to necessarily care how the company does in the big scheme of things, right? Because they just want to play the game. But I think if you're going to have an ethical mindset on it, you as a player should want your game to succeed and should want more players to play the game because you should care about the longevity of the game and hope that the game, you know, increases in population or increases in revenue or whatever else, because you know that could mean potentially new and better things. In my current preferences as an MMO player, I vastly prefer a PvP experience. I prefer a sandbox experience, right? I like when things are a little bit more freeform. I'm not really a big fan of theme park games. I'm very big into permanence, so because of that, I am more interested in things like open PvP or PvPvE more so than I am an arena, for example. A PvP arena might not really entice me as much because I would rather seeing my foe out on a battlefield while I'm PvEing, for example. I like that. It seems like the overwhelming amount of people have said that I shouldn't bother playing with a mouse and keyboard, which, you know, I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to PC games. I don't like to use a console controller on a PC. I just, it's one of those things for me that I like rarely, if ever, budge on, unless I'm playing an emulator. Because, you know, the way I see it is that I play a PC so I can play with a mouse and keyboard. The idea of playing with the keyboard itself, as I'm doing right now, it's actually relatively intuitive. It feels kind of intuitive. It feels like it kind of makes sense. I'm using the JKLI keys to move my camera around. It doesn't feel incredibly different, but it's not intuitive to me. Like, it doesn't feel like how I would normally play the game. Drakendite, yeah, I would say that the game seems to have been either originally designed for a cross-platform experience, or the mouse was not, or the mouse camera was not really understood at the time. You have a hunch that the second digit is odd. Oh man, that's not particularly useful. Can I examine it again? You have a hunch that the combination is greater than 76. Alright, let's start guessing. Alright, let's go 80. We have a hunch that it is greater than 80. Okay. Let's do 5 intervals. Alright, we're running out of guesses here, boys. I'm gonna have to go for something crazy. No! I didn't mean to examine it. I wouldn't have got that either, by the way. I was gonna say 97. Just like in any MMO, Final Fantasy XI is going to have a slower start, right? I mean, you're gonna start with fairly few abilities, very little bit of gear, slow kind of progression, and that's just typical for most MMOs. It's compounded, I think, a little bit in Final Fantasy XI because the movement is slower, the combat is slower, and so things seem even slower than possible, but most MMOs are going to be typically pretty slow. Yeah, this song is not particularly very good, Ludens. The other music was much better because like music when you're exploring a town or an area should be kind of soothing and almost like accompany you. This one like distracts you. It's like, hello, we are playing really loud music, in that exact like tone. Rosalind. Looks like a dude. If you notice in this quick little, I guess, group of people right here, as an example, look at how different these people's gear look. You have this guy over here, Elvano. He looks kind of like a aristocrat, some type of spellcaster. You have Kokot, who looks like he's a farmer, or she's a farmer. Zathana, who looks like she's certainly some type of warrior. What do you call those things again? Cat people? And then Pepe Frog looks like he's like a feudal era samurai. Or feudal era peasant. And then Machiavelli looks like a feudal era samurai. But look at how all of these people look different. Isn't that crazy? In a current MMO, you would never see this level of diversity. In fact, look at a game like Black Desert Online. Doesn't it have such an issue when it comes to finding actual costumes that look different? But then look at how different all of these people look. That's certainly something that's positive about the game. And here you have an example of what's supposed to be part of a new player experience, which all it has done really is just confuse things more. I get his general point, but the way he explained it, or the way the game explained it, I guess I should say, is not particularly helpful. Could be translation stuff. In summation, like anyone would even be used to hearing that word, let alone explain all the other stuff that he said. Yeah, I love how in old school MMOs everyone looks so distinctive. It makes it a pleasure to walk around and you actually look at different characters and you wonder kind of what's their story, what type of class are they, what type of, you know, abilities do they use. Maybe if you're more of like a roleplay focused person, you know, what's their personal story, that kind of thing. Hey, Ludens, I told you, man, Pac ain't dead, dude. That's him right there. Ambitions as a samurai. That's quite the interesting outfit. Hey look, that's that tower that I was looking at earlier. You can actually see the NPCs in there. That's the beauty of having, like, although the game, it does have certain instances, it does it in a way where it doesn't take away from the game. Like, that still seems like it's part of the same instance, even though it technically isn't. I like this chest unlocking. I like that you have to actually, like, put in effort to open the chest. Let's go with 35. Oh, let's go! My first guess, baby. And it feels so damn good. You don't think you've ever seen anyone use a mouse for this? I'm gonna assume that they either played the game back then when not using a mouse was somehow typical on a PC game. It really is much better using the keyboard, but like I said, out of my own stubbornness, I don't want to. I also think it's silly that you would even have to. Or be forced to use a controller. PC Master Race, man. I have to say, I'm not particularly a fan of going around and grinding the same, you know, low-level mobs as a form of progression. I'm sure the game speeds up as you go later into it, but that's kind of where I kind of grew out of the PvE aspects of certain MMOs. That's not what I would particularly call exciting. And I don't think particularly ages well. Because at least in theme park games, you are killing worms and low-level mobs over and over again. But it happens so fast that you don't necessarily think about it as much as being a negative, I guess. I'm sure it probably does speed up. I think ultimately, though, it's sort of a scenario of which I don't really know how much it would be for me, even if it sped up. Because I'm not, you know, really that player who's interested in PvEing for large amounts of time, you know, in games like Dauntless, you know, new age games, I should say, like Dauntless and Monster Hunter and such. Like, I don't even like playing action games, just for the fact that you just kind of mindlessly kill things with little to no story. Oh, that hit him hard, dude. Let's go. See? I understand this game on a deep level, guys. Things I love so far. I love the music. I love the world. I love Final Fantasy. I love the diversity, both in the way people play and the way people look. Things I don't like. The combat system is a little outdated and frankly really slow. Especially apparently for a spellcaster. I dislike the camera system, which almost forces you to use a controller essentially. And then the tutorial system, funny enough, is almost more complicated than not having a tutorial system in the first place in some ways. Yeah, the issue with upgrading older games is that inevitably it gets to a certain point where you can't necessarily upgrade it anymore. Like, this game obviously has a new tutorial system that they implemented for newer players. It has content in which they made the game easier to level in, but it's kind of hard to be accessible, even though they're trying their best, just because of the way the game engine works and the camera system works, for example. The inherent nature of a sandbox game, or a game in which is typically seen as being more sandbox than it is theme park, is that they're almost always harder to get into. They're not as guided of an experience, and for some people that's a big problem. And then also, if you don't start at the start of a sandbox game, you can feel quite overwhelmed with just the sheer amount of options and things that there is to do. That was me when I played Star Wars Galaxies. I didn't play it at launch, and so after I had played it, you know, basically through the combat upgrade and then into NGE, there's just so much stuff that it was quite overwhelming. Now, mind you, I was a kid and it was one of my first big MMOs, so my mind was open to learning all of that stuff, you know. I had the sponge mindset, if you will. But I can understand how people would be kind of overwhelmed with such in a negative way. As MMOs started to evolve, mainly due to like WoW's success, for example, WoW took what EverQuest did and streamlined it, which affected all of these other games too. That's why people who are, you know, MMO players because of WoW, or in the age of WoW in a way, would play a game like this and just say that it's not like WoW, so it's not good. They might not even be open to learning any parts of the game, even if there is redeeming qualities in the game. And that's problematic. I mean, as the MMO market started to evolve, in a weird way, it started to devolve. It's almost like it went from being super social, having this open sandbox experience, and now it became this like very, you know, I would say handcuffs. Like, you're very handcuffed in certain ways, right? Especially theme park games. You can't go past a certain part. There's arbitrary blocks, you know, when you try to go to a new zone. There's not really, exploring isn't really a thing, right? You can't really explore. You can't really, there's no sense of wonder, no sense of true achievement, because everything is more about getting an arbitrary number, an arbitrary gear score. It takes away a lot of the soul of a game. And I'm not trying to demonize WoW and say that WoW has no redeeming qualities. I'm just saying that's sort of what it did to the market in a way, you know? It really affected it. But yeah, I think, like I said, in a weird way, it's almost like the WoW market, the WoW universe, whatever you would like to call it, set MMOs back while progressing, you know? While the technology, usability, and gameplay aspects became easier and more accessible, it's almost like MMOs as a whole kind of took a step back. I mean, look at the crowdfunded MMOs that are coming out, by the way. Nearly all of them, as far as I can tell, are sandboxes. Isn't that interesting? Star Citizen, a sandbox. Camelot Unchained, a sandbox. Crowfall, mixture of theme park and sandbox, right? Ashes of Creation, more sandboxy. Chronicles of Ilaria, sandbox. Isn't it interesting that in 2017, 2018, we're still seeing the rise, essentially, of sandbox games when sandbox games were basically the first MMOs. As much as I love sandboxes, though, I'm one of the first people to say that having a sandbox have next to no idea, or give you next to no idea on how to play the early game, is problematic. And I don't like when veterans take the stance of like, oh, if you don't understand it, you're just stupid, or you're not willing to put in the time and effort. It's like, first impressions are important. That's the end of my near 6-hour playthrough of Final Fantasy XI, and I feel I have garnered some adequate amount of experience to form some impressions on the title. Obviously, we're not going to talk much about the endgame in this video. We typically won't ever do that on this show, unless we have access to some sort of maxed character. Not to mention, the early few hours experience should theoretically be enough to form some sort of opinion in regards to an MMO. First impressions are very important after all. When we're handling a newer game, of course your first impressions don't really have a basis to base them on, so you're just kind of winging it. Now in regards to old games, you have to put yourself into the mindset of when the game came out. In this case, Final Fantasy XI came out in 2002. So when I make some of my analysis here, I have to imagine what the game would be like if I was playing it back then to some extent. As I explained at the top, we have some important questions to answer in regards to Final Fantasy XI. How does this game hold up in 2018? Throughout my time playing the game, I couldn't help but feel like it was really a Final Fantasy kind of experience. Final Fantasy XIV sure is more popular, and sure is likely going to have way more players than Final Fantasy XI ever had, but it doesn't quite have the same level of charm that Final Fantasy XI did. Final Fantasy XI reminded me of playing a real Final Fantasy game. It wasn't like playing a Final Fantasy game turned MMO, or a MMO with Final Fantasy, like experiences. It really felt like you're playing a Final Fantasy game, and that's negative and positive at the same time. Negative in the sense that combat is surely slower, the camera is pretty clunky, and really in regards to the story content, it's a lot of just kind of go around here, do this, fetch this quest for me. It's not particularly unique in any sort of way. But the positives are you get the music of a Final Fantasy world, you get the universe, of Final Fantasy. The world itself is just massive, not to mention everything feels like huge. Everywhere you go, yeah, there's some issues in regards to some copy-paste landscapes, and some of the world or areas in the world feel a little bit empty. They don't feel particularly packed with things to do necessarily. But the game itself really does feel like a sandbox, and I think in that regards it holds up in 2018. Now in terms of its gameplay, its camera, its questing, its new player experience, certainly doesn't really hold up to 2018, but that's okay. I mean, I don't think Final Fantasy XI at this point is really striving to gain that sort of population. I mean, it's a little bit late for them in that regards, and not to mention that they have Final Fantasy XIV, which in many ways is going after that newer audience anyway. So what makes this game unique? What makes Final Fantasy XI unique? Well, we obviously have to go back and harp on the fact that the game is a Final Fantasy MMO, in the truest sense of the word. It's not a theme park, it doesn't have tons of instances, it really does feel like you're part of a world. When you make your character, and you look at all of these different people around you dressing their characters in particular sets of gear and whatever else, it seems very distinctive. it really does make you think that you are in a Final Fantasy universe. And that's really important for things like roleplay, for feeling immersion in regards to doing certain things, and certainly contributes to the fact that people are still playing it to this day. It's still getting content coming out. Final Fantasy XI has a huge focus on group experiences. The game is nearly unplayable by yourself, and maybe not in regards to the companion system that's in the game, which certainly makes it easier for new players to get into the game, but really the in-game content is about PvEing, it's about PvE questing, and all of that is done with a group. This is a game in which you can't really exist without having some sort of group to help you out. And I think that's a key feature in making this game the way it is, and a key feature in making the game unique. MMOs nowadays really have lost their identity in regards to this aspect. There's negatives to it. I mean, some people want to play solo, for example, and some people aren't maybe necessarily interested in doing group-based PvE content. But when you have an MMO and you take away the desire or even need to group with people, or even just have player interactions really in general, it doesn't feel like an MMO anymore. That's sort of my issue with these plastic-feeling theme park games that are out nowadays. Now, would I recommend a new player to play Final Fantasy XI? This is a hard question to answer. We should first get it out of the way that if you are not a PvE player or a PvE group content, type of player, don't play this game. There's really not much PvP, if any, here. There's no open PvP. There's no ganking, looting, full loot type PvP. There's not even really arenas or anything. PvP is not a serious feature of Final Fantasy XI, so full stop if you're not a PvE player in regards to playing this game. If you are a Final Fantasy fan, and I mean a truest fan in the sense of the word, I certainly think it's at least trying the free trial. You gotta get an idea of what it was like for them to create this Final Fantasy world with not particularly having a lot of experience. I mean, this game came out before World of Warcraft, which, as Final Fantasy XI fans would probably say, was a good thing because it allowed them to have their own distinctive feel. It didn't try to copy off of anything. The new player experience, it's lacking, guys. It sucks to say, but it's a bit difficult. You're gonna have to look up a guide if you want to play this game. You're gonna have to find a group of guys to play with. You're gonna really have to put in a good amount of effort just to get into the game and then get into the very early phases of the game. So that aspect could be scary to new players. But once again, if you're a big Final Fantasy fan, or maybe you're even a Final Fantasy XIV fan, and you want to see kind of where Final Fantasy XIV got some of the elements that it has in the game, where it got its inspiration from, then I definitely recommend at least trying Final Fantasy XI. The other reason to try the game simply comes down to the fact that it might not be here much longer, guys. It's an old game, 16 years old at this point. They're clearly making enough money to keep the game running, but who knows how long it's going to be around. Try it in that regards, or just watch this video and maybe just glean some of that information, or maybe live vicariously through me and my first experience playing the game. Other than that, that's pretty much all I have to say in regards to this. Thanks for watching this episode of MMO Lab on Final Fantasy XI. The next episode will be on Star Wars: The Old Republic. Thanks for watching as always, and I will see you guys in the next stream on my twitch.tv/nerdSlayer channel, or watching my next YouTube video. Peace out.